Arthur Brooks is a professor of the practice of public leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and Arthur Patterson Faculty Fellow at the Harvard Business School. Before joining the Harvard faculty in July of 2019, he served for 10 years as the president of the Washington, D.C.-based American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Brooks is the author of 11 books, including the national bestseller, Love Your Enemy, The Conservative Heart, and The Road to Freedom. He has published dozens of academic journal articles and the textbook, Social Entrepreneurship. He's a columnist for The Atlantic, host of the podcast, The Art of Happiness with Arthur Brooks, and subject of the 2019 documentary film, The Pursuit, which Variety named as one of the best documentaries on Netflix. In August 2019, he gives more than 100 speeches per year around the US, Europe, and Asia. So, es un honor para mí darle la bienvenida al Dr. Brooks, porque habla un perfecto español. Bienvenido, doctor, a Los Ángeles virtualmente. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Es un honor para mí estar aquí con ustedes. He tenido mucha ilusión de hacer esta conferencia con todos ustedes. Your Excellency, it's Archbishop Gomez. It's wonderful to see you. Good to see you again. My only wish is that it were in person, but we will be in person soon enough. I'm also delighted to be joined by my friend Bishop Bob Barron, who has done so much for me and so much for my family. Thank you for giving me half an hour of your time, and I'm hoping that I can use this time to remind myself and all of us of a couple of our Catholic values that I think are so urgently in need in our culture. What I think about is our culture of contempt. Given the fact that we're in a Zoom environment, it'll be much easier. I think I'm going to share my screen, if you don't mind. And in so doing, I want to show you some slides that I think might be useful. I call my talk today a solution to the culture of contempt, and I'm going to explain that here in a minute. And I'm going to start off my remarks by just introducing a mystery. In 1969, Richard Nixon, the new president of the United States, was facing a big problem in Vietnam. There was a mystery, which was that the United States was losing the Vietnam War against all odds. It didn't make sense. People were saying that, you know, with a superior military force, with superior numbers and armaments, that the United States shouldn't be losing. So he impaneled a congressional delegation to go to Vietnam and find the answer as to why. They came back after 1 month and they gave him this answer. Mr. President, 20% of American military forces are addicted to heroin. That's the problem. Well, I mean, of course, there are many problems, but when 1/5 of your troops are addicted to heroin, how could you possibly win a war? How could you possibly be effective in anything? And so, of course, they put together some sort of a plan on how to deal with this. But then quickly, the attention moved to what are we going to do when these troops come home? Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of American troops addicted to heroin hitting our streets. It's going to be a crisis. There is no solution. So they put together a plan with criminal justice and you know, drug enforcement policies and public health and drug interdiction, everything else you can imagine. And they braced themselves, and tens of thousands of heroin addicted American soldiers came home from Vietnam, and nothing happened. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. 95% stopped using heroin permanently on their first day home. Nobody could figure out why that happened, because never in the history of drug addiction had anybody ever seen a phenomenon such as this. Well, it went unanswered for a long time why suddenly drug addicts would stop being drug addicts. But about 20 years later, the mystery was finally solved. And here, my friends, is the solution. Now, I know you're priests and not chemists. But let me tell you what this is. This is a molecule known as oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone. It's a neurotransmitter produced naturally by the human brain. When you have eye contact with or touch with another human being, especially somebody that you love. Your brain connects you to other people because of oxytocin. Well, no, because of God's love, of course. But oxytocin is the means by which God binds us to each other. This is one of the most amazing things for people in my field. I'm a social scientist. I do work on the social science of happiness and love and the neurobiology of happiness and love. And I see something like this, and it makes me more of a Christian to understand that I have this in my brain. Now, when do you get this? You get this when you see a long-lost friend. You get this when you see your parents. I got this, I remember for the first time, the explosion of oxytocin in my brain, the first time I laid eyes on my firstborn son. He made eye contact with me, and something just blew up inside my brain. It was the most amazing experience I'd ever seen. And neuroscientists understand that we simply can't exist without the love molecule, without oxytocin. So what does this have to do with soldiers in Vietnam? Oxytocin is very similar chemically to opiates, such as OxyContin. If you have ever asked, and many of you have as priests, you've talked to a drug addict, you've talked to a heroin addict, and maybe you've asked the question, the impolite question, what does it feel like? Frequently, they'll say, it feels like pure love. The reason is because it's similar chemically to oxytocin, but oxytocin, the love molecule, is better. The men in Vietnam were lonely. The men in Vietnam were love-starved, and so they got a substitute for love in the shot, in the addiction. When they came home and they saw their girlfriends and their wives and their parents and their friends and their children, they didn't need the heroin anymore, and they stopped. Now this was a mystery to science, but you know who this is not a mystery to? How do you solve all of life's problems? This is not a mystery to you. As Christians, we've always known that love is the answer to our world's woes. The ultimate negative emotion is fear. That's why St. John the Apostle said there is no love in fear, that perfect love drives out fear, that the one who fears is not made perfect in love. Tertullian, 2 centuries later, describing how the pagans, how the Romans, they treated the Christians with amazement by saying, look, they say, how the Christians love one another, for they themselves hate one another, and how they're ready to die for each other, for they themselves are ready to kill each other. The transformation, and ultimately, this is what made the Romans into Christians, was the magnetic inescapability of love. This is the secret to neutralizing fear, we know as Christians. This is the secret to combating pathology. We know this as scientists, and we know this from history and from every example. So what's the lesson? The first lesson I want to share with you is the lesson that we all learned in 1 Corinthians. Faith, hope, and love, these three remain, but the greatest of these is love. Love is our apostolate. Bishop Barron asked me to talk to you about problems in our society and solutions. And tonight it's tonight for me because I'm in Washington, D.C. It's afternoon for you. I have just one solution, which is love, but I'm going to do something better. I'm going to talk to you about 2 ways that we can apply it in new and novel ways. Part 2 of my remarks are starting to apply the secret, the love to a society that doesn't have it in new and creative ways. Edgar Allan Poe, one of the greatest American poets, of course. We all read Edgar Allan Poe. Those of you who, if you grew up in the United States, you know, in high school, you had to memorize these poems. Edgar Allan Poe one time explained his deep, deep depression with this poem. From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source, I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. This poem is entitled Alone. His misery, He chalked up his ultimate demise by his own hand because he was alone, because he was lonely and isolated. Now, that was a long time ago. Fast forward to the present. It's worse. I'm sorry to tell all of you that we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic in America today. And of course, this is not news to many of you. I mean, you're dealing apostolically and pastorally with people all day long who are lonely. And these are not just people who are physically alone. These might be people who are surrounded with others. But the loneliness epidemic is rife. It's spreading. It's a huge problem in our society today. There's a health insurance company called Cigna. You've all heard of Cigna. They now have a 40-person team of doctors and scientists dedicated to trying to solve the loneliness epidemic. Why? Because it's driving up their costs with drug addiction, with alcoholism, with obesity, and with suicide. The loneliness epidemic has reached a proportion in which depression and anxiety are rising every single year, and it's especially a problem for young adults. So what are they missing? What are these young adults missing? When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about a suicide explosion among women and girls between the ages of 15 and 24, of young men in their 20s. What's happening here? You go to a place like Yale University, once great Yale University, where 55% of the undergraduates are being treated for mental illness. 55% for anxiety and depression. What's going on? Well, I asked a colleague of mine, a friend of mine who teaches at San Diego State University. She's a social psychologist by the name of Jean Twenge. And she said, the problem is they're not in love. These young people, they're not falling in love. And I said, that's crazy. Young people, that's all they live for. Young people are always in love. There's nothing else. Unless they have a religious vocation, it's love for all of them. We have too much love. She said, no, look at the data. She showed me a 30 percentage point drop in dating for people in their late teens and early 20s. When I was a senior in high school, these many years ago in the 1980s, the likelihood that I would date was about 85%. Now it's about 55%. You never see numbers like this. There's 50% less marriage. Now, I thought when I first saw these data, well, maybe they're just living together. They're not. They're 50% less likely to live together. That's good, but bad, but good. You understand my point. There's a 1/3 lower likelihood for people in their 20s today to say that they're in love compared to things the way they were when I was in my 20s. Now, this is a mystery. You see the problem. You see the problem in our society where people are isolated and they're lonely and they're anxious and they're depressed. And the reason is, among young people, no small part, because they lack romantic love. Why aren't they falling in love? So I went to another scholar, a friend of mine. His name is Jonathan Haidt. He teaches at New York University, a famous social psychologist. Many of you have heard of him. And he said, they're afraid because they're playing it safe. They're avoiding rejection and risk. He said, and he has the data, and I saw the data, and it's true that young people are more fearful of social relationships than they've ever seen before. And this comports with what we see on college campuses. I teach on a college campus. I teach at Harvard University. And I can tell you that when students are exposed to ideas that they've never heard before, they say they feel unsafe. They use this language of safety. It's almost a religion, safetyism, let's call it. They're less likely to talk to each other if they don't know each other because it makes them feel, as they say, unsafe. They're afraid. They're afraid of being rejected. They're afraid of risk. And so I asked Jonathan Haidt, my friend, who you see in this slide right here, I said, John, whose fault is that? And he said, it's your fault. And I said, what did I do? What did I do? And he said, so how old are your kids? I said, 22, 20, and 17. My little girl is 17. And he said, well, answer me this. How old were you the first time that your parents let you out of the house on an errand or walked to school by yourself? I said, I don't know, 5. He said, how old was your daughter? And I said, probably 14. He said, see, she was never exposed to risk. And so she was never able to push through it. Now, to be sure, all of us who are my age, I'm 56 years old, and a lot of you are my age, that, we were exposed to too much risk. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. I'm a West Coast person like most of you. And when I was growing up, there was this crazy fear that was ripping through America about serial killers, that a serial killer was going to grab your kid. It was in the news. And I happened to live in a neighborhood in Seattle where Ted Bundy, the serial killer, had been marauding a year or two before. Well, I had a paper route early in the morning. I used to get up and deliver papers at 5 o'clock in the morning. And my mom, my mother of blessed memory, she said, "Do you think it's safe for our 12-year-old son to be walking around at night when there's serial killers about?" And my father, who was a biostatistician, he was a PhD, the scientist, he was ready for this. And he said, he said to my mom, "Well, even the weirdos have to sleep sometime." And my mom was having none of that. So he took a different line of argumentation and he said, "Well, I've been running the numbers on this, and Arthur, me, doesn't actually fit the core demographic profile for a serial killer." That was a different time where kids got to take a lot of risk. Not anymore. So what happens is that we adjudicate the disputes of children. We don't let them, we're not exposing them to any risk at all. They go to college where they're not exposed to risk. And when they get out, no wonder they don't fall in love. No wonder they're afraid of each other, that they're talking about their safety all the time. There's too much fear. And when you think about it, love, as we all know, as Catholics, as Christians, love is the most entrepreneurial thing in the world. It is the enterprise of life. You see, what entrepreneurs do? They start businesses, they put money at risk, and they're looking for explosive rewards. Well, that's what love is too. It's putting your heart at risk, which is the most important thing, in return for explosive rewards. I remember when I was trying to get my now wife Esther to marry me. Unfortunately, we didn't speak the same language. She spoke Spanish and I spoke English. I remember trying to get her to understand that I was in love with her, and I felt afraid, and it felt entrepreneurial. Well, if you have no experience with risk, if you have no ability to take fear, you simply won't do that. Love, as an act of personal entrepreneurship, is supposed to be risky and scary. And we can remind people to take more risk for love. I did just that. 2 years ago, I was giving a speech in Washington, D.C., where I am tonight. And I was talking to a large group of young people on Capitol Hill, of congressional staffers. And I said, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to take a risk with your heart for something truly big. Drive out the fear by facing that fear. Declare your love. Well, a week or two later, a young guy, he stops me. I'm on an airplane, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And he walks up to me on an airplane. He said, "Are you Dr. Brooks?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I saw you give that speech in Washington, D.C. about being an entrepreneur with my heart. And I can't get it out of my head." He said, "I'm on my way right now to declare my love for a woman that I have secretly loved for 2 years because of your speech." And I said, "It's only a speech, man." I thought that, who knows, I was going to ruin his life. Well, I gave him my email. I said, "Let me know how it goes." I said my rosary for him and I hope to be his wife at some point. I hope that she would reciprocate. I didn't hear from him for about 3 months. And I ran into him at a Christmas party. And I walked up to him and I said, "Remember me?" And he said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Oh boy." I said, "What happened with that girl?" He said, "She shot me down." She didn't just tell me she didn't love me. She introduced me to her new boyfriend. It's horrible. Well, I was contrite. I was sorry. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to give you bad advice." He said, No. I've been meaning to email you to thank you." I said, "Thank me? Why would you thank me?" He said, "Because that was the thing I was most afraid of in life. And it happened, and I didn't die." He said, "I'm never going to be afraid of that again because I broke through that wall." How many of us, as parents, as priests, are giving young people this advice that if they want to be fully in communion with love, that if they want to experience God's love, they have to experience it refracted by being entrepreneurs. We need more romantic love in our society. We need to advise people to declare their love more and to take more risk. To spread God's love, promote love. Love this from the Song of Songs. You know, you read the Song of Songs, it feels almost indecent, doesn't it? I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my lover, what shall you tell him? But I am faint with love. There is nothing more biblical than romantic love. And when people are afraid of it, we can't make progress in our apostolate properly. Part 3. Well, that last one, the first piece of advice that I offer to you with humility and affection and admiration is to talk more openly about love all the time. The second was to advise people to declare their love. Now the hard one. Now the hard part. In 2014, I was doing, going about my business. For a job, I do 150, 175 speeches a year. I travel around a lot. It's the best life. I love it. And I also try to keep up on my field. So I was reading a technical journal article, a scholarly article from a social psychology journal from 3 psychologists at Northwestern University on a technical thing called motive attribution asymmetry. What's that? Motive attribution asymmetry is a case in which people can't get out of a conflict because both sides believe that they are motivated by love, but the other side is motivated by hatred. Now, when you think about it, that's an error because 2 sides to a conflict can't simultaneously be motivated both by love and by hatred. It's impossible. So therefore, it's a mistake. But this is what explains most conflicts. When you encounter a couple that can't get along, it's because of motive attribution asymmetry most of the time. Most of the time, each one thinks, I love, but the other person hates, so we have nothing to talk about. This is also true in the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. If you look at the data, both sides believe that they have love, but the other side has hatred. And in the Balkans, and in Rwanda, and every place else. So, I had that on my mind because in this article that I read, the scholars showed that for the first time in American history, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans have the same level of motive attribution asymmetry as the Palestinians and the Israelis. Think about that. This is on my mind. This is on my heart. A couple months later, I was giving a speech at a conservative rally in New Hampshire. Now, I speak to all audiences. I speak to progressives and conservatives, everybody, because I talk about ideas, and I love it, and I'm grateful for it. I thank God for it every day. At this conservative rally, I was the only person who was speaking who was not running for president of the United States. So obviously, I mean, it was all the people that wanted to run in 2016. This is in 2014. 2016, they were going to run for president. They were all stacked up at this important rally, and I was the only one who wasn't running for president. So I knew this was a mistake. So I thought to myself, I said a little prayer backstage. I said, Lord, what can I do that they can't? And the answer is, say whatever I want. I don't need any votes. It's beautiful. So I got up and I said to this audience, I said, you've been hearing from presidential candidates who are telling you that you're right and that the other side is evil and the other side is stupid. But I want you to remember something. The other side is not stupid and evil. They're simply Americans who disagree with you on public policy. And if you want to convince them of your point of view, which should be your goal, if you want to convince them of your point of view, you can't do it with insults because nobody in history has ever been convinced by insults, converted by insults and hatred. The only way that you can do it is with love. Now, I thought that was kind of profound, kind of compelling. And a lady in the audience yelled out, actually, they're stupid and evil. Now, I didn't feel insulted. She was joking, and she was with friends. But at that moment, I want to tell you what went through my head. I thought about Seattle. I already told you it's my hometown. Seattle is the most politically progressive, secular place in America, literally. Okay? My father was a college professor. My mother was an artist in Seattle. What do you think their politics were? I'm the oddball. I'm the conservative Catholic. I'm the weird one in my family. Let me tell you about my parents. Great parents, not stupid and not evil. That lady in that audience was insulting my mother, and I took it personally. So what's the answer to that? Is it for me to get angry? Is it for me to lash out? It's got to be a better way, because it's not that lady, it's the whole country. It's the whole country that's at odds, that's polarized, that's hammer and tongs, that's dog eat dog, politically and ideologically and everything else. What do we do? What can we do to create more reconciliation, to create more love? As Catholic lay people and clergy, we got to have a solution. Well, first of all, let's diagnose the problem. You know, there's a simple negative primary emotion called anger that's processed by the limbic system of the brain. And here's an interesting thing. I mean, I realize that anger is a deadly sin, but psychologists have clearly found that anger and divorce are uncorrelated. Why? Because anger is an emotion that says, I care what you think and I want it to change. Right? That's not correlated with divorce. And I can tell you, I've been married for 29 years to a Spaniard. And the secret to my 29 years of happy marriage is the lack of correlation between anger and divorce. Here's where it gets dangerous. There's another primary negative emotion called disgust, which you save for pathogens, things that are dangerous, awful, things you find on the bottom of your shoe. When you mix anger and disgust together, it turns ice cold, and that's a complex emotion that we call contempt. This is Arthur Schopenhauer on this slide. Arthur Schopenhauer defined contempt in 1860 or so as the unsullied conviction of the worthlessness of another. You know, actually, I didn't really need to show you Arthur Schopenhauer's picture. The reason I did that is because when you're bald, people say that you have no options for your hair, and I've got options. Just look at Schopenhauer. So contempt, if you want a permanent enemy, show contempt. Show disgust for another human being. Show the unsullied conviction that that person is worthless. You will have a permanent enemy. All right, now you're getting it all the time. The Catholic Church is getting it constantly. I'm getting it as a Catholic lay person. You're getting it 10 times more. You're getting it from the press, you're getting it from the elites, you're getting it from entertainment, you're getting it from the media, you're getting it from people on the street. I know how it feels, and you know even more, that you're getting contempt all the time. So what's the solution? Not just to protect ourselves, but for a culture that's being driven apart by contempt, because this is how we treat each other politically. When I say we, I mean me. I wrote a book last year that came out in 2019 called Love Your Enemies. I wonder where that came from. I was giving a speech on it at a university, and a kid comes up later and he says, "That's a great title. How did you think of it?" Say, Matthew. So, love your enemies. And in that book, I talked about the fact that, I'm guilty. I saw myself on TV not long ago. I was watching a clip from CNN or CNBC. I was doing a debate with this nice lady, and she made what I consider to be an ill-considered point. And I rolled my eyes, which is the ultimate sign of contempt. I acted with sarcasm and derision, as if she were worthless. I guarantee you she did not go home that night and say to her husband, "I was debating Arthur Brooks on television tonight, and he was making some good points." I guarantee you she went home and said, "I was debating Arthur Brooks on TV, and he's a jerk." And she was right to say that. We're guilty of this. And our society is being torn apart by this. And we have to have a solution for this. The solution, as always, can and should come from the Catholic Church. So what are the solutions? Ask around. People say, we need more civility. We need more tolerance. Those are garbage standards. If I told you that my wife Esther and I are civil to each other, you'd say that we need counseling. If I told you that my employees tolerate me, You'd say that I have a big human resource crisis on my hands. This is not the solution to contempt. What is the solution to contempt? We get it from our Lord. When I tell you, he didn't say, be civil to your enemies. Tolerate those who persecute you. Of course not. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Show people what this means and the magic that it actually brings. I know it's hard, but it's been harder in the past. It's interesting, people say, well, what if my enemies, what if they deserve hatred? What if they deserve contempt? Martin Luther King was asked this question. He said, love them anyway. Love has within it a redemptive power, he said on November 17th, 1957, at the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And there is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says, love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. He most certainly does not say, Jesus does not say, like your enemies, because to like is a sentimental thing, isn't it? It's a feeling. It's an emotion. Bishop Barron reminds us that St. Thomas Aquinas defines love as to will the good of the other. St. Thomas Aquinas doesn't call it a feeling at all. It's a commitment. It's an act. It's for strong people, not for weak people at all. This, I believe, is our message as Catholics, to bring love in the face of contempt, to fire up people, to act with love where there is contempt. The ultimate test of apostolate in troubled times is to seek out contempt and answer it with love. Seek it out. Now think about this for a second. Ordinarily, if there's a pathogen like the coronavirus, I would not recommend that you expose yourself to it and ask your friend who has it to cough in your face. Contempt is a pathogen that we need to seek out because that's our opportunity to apply the cure to it. When I say apostolic work, I mean that. It's mission work. I have missionaries on both sides of my family. I was raised Protestant. I was raised evangelical Protestant until I was 15 years old, and I had a mystical experience at the Shrine of Guadalupe. I'm so happy to see Archbishop Gomez with Our Lady behind him, who redeemed me, brought me to the Lord. But I had missionaries on both sides of the family. Let me tell you something about missionaries. They're happy. Let me tell you something else about missionaries. They get lots of rejection. You want to know words that nobody has ever uttered in history? Oh, good, there's missionaries on the porch. Nobody wants to see missionaries on the porch, right? They're always like, pretend we're not home. But they're overwhelmingly happy because they're bringing truth. They're bringing light where there is darkness. And that is a joyful thing to do, right? I mean, Bishop Barron tells a story about this church in South Carolina or someplace that has a sign over the door, you're entering mission territory, for people who are going out to their cars, right? I remember thinking that, it struck me so much, and then I saw it at a Legionaries of Christ retreat center. And it was for the parishioners as they were going out to their cars. I was teaching marriage, or teaching pre-Cana, marriage prep with my wife Esther. And I remembered that, and I thought about exactly this. We need to create a greater apostolate. We need to fire people up. We need to make them apostles and missionaries for the idea of seeking out contempt and joyfully answering it with love. And when do we do it? We do it in the course of our ordinary work. Before I close, because you have other things to do, I want to remind you of something that you've probably seen before. I want to give you a little quote of something that's really moved me, somebody who's a personal hero, a spiritual master of mine, St. Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. He gave a speech in 1967 in Spain. This is a country that was torn apart by ideological division. At a university that he founded, where he was the rector, the University of Navarre in Pamplona in northern Spain. passionately loving the world. He said to his faculty, I assure you, my sons and daughters, that when a Christian carries out with love the most insignificant everyday action, that action overflows with the transcendence of God. Heaven and earth seem to merge, my sons and daughters, on the horizon. But where they really meet is in your hearts, when you sanctify your everyday lives. Now, it's easy to say that complicated problems require complicated solutions. You know, the most beautiful thing today is the complicated problem we have in our culture of the contempt between American and American, of people toward immigrants, of people toward priests in the Roman Catholic Church. It has a simple solution, is to do what Jesus Christ taught us, to live the apostolate, to every day to live it out with love, to encourage people to talk about love, to declare their love, and to face down hatred with love. And if I can do that, and if you can teach that, and if more people can do that, then once again, the Catholic Church will take its place as that which heals the division in our society and makes our nation new again. I believe that this is our holy apostolate, the hardest time in the political history that I've experienced. But it gives me great joy and it gives me great energy, because in the tragedy, in the challenge, lies the opportunity for me truly and deeply to share my faith. I'm honored to be with you, fathers, and Your Excellency. I hope I can be helpful to you in some other way. Thank you for asking me to be with you here this afternoon. God bless your work. I'm praying for you, and I ask that you pray for me and my family as well. Over to you, Archbishop.
Dr. Brooks, thank you very much. It was a very inspirational conversation and obviously a lot to think about. May God bless you. And just know that if you ever need confessions, you have 400 priests that can help you.
I always need confessions, Father. Thank you.
May God bless you and your family. Thank you for the work you do.
Arthur, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I hope to see you soon. So
I hope to see you soon too.
Right.
You're always in my prayer. You're always in my prayers, Your Excellency. All of you, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you.
You as well. My brothers, well, I hope you enjoy the beautiful talk.